Welcome, restless souls, to Carmen's Crypt. I'm Carmen Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carmen's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carmen's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. The Johnsons were the perfect subjects. Young couple, first home, eager to start a family. They had no idea they were being watched. None of them ever did. From my station in the abandoned warehouse across town, I observed James and Jude Johnson's every move through a wall of flickering monitors. Each screen showed a different room in their new house. The living room with its cozy fireplace, the sunlit kitchen, the master bedroom with its king-size bed. Even the bathroom wasn't spared from my gaze. The low hum of equipment was comforting, familiar. 20 years I'd been doing this. 20 years of peering into the lives of strangers, cataloging their habits, their secrets, their most intimate moments. The Johnsons were simply the latest in a long line of subjects, but something about them was different, special. Jude, especially. There was something in the way she moved through the house, always looking over her shoulder, as if she could sense me watching. It sent a thrill through me that I hadn't felt in years. I'd installed the cameras myself, as I always did. It was meticulous work, hiding them in light fixtures, behind air vents, nestled in the corners of bookshelves. But it was worth it for the crystal clear views they provided. The Johnson house had been vacant for months before they moved in. Plenty of time for me to make my preparations. They weren't the first family to live in that house. The Millers had been there before them, and before the Millers, the Changs. I'd watched them all. Something about that house kept drawing me back, like a moth to flame. Jude appears restless today, I murmured, recording into my digital journal as I watched Jude pace the kitchen. Third time this week she's checked the locks before bed. They had moved in 3 weeks ago, and already I knew their routines by heart. James left for work at 7:30 a.m. sharp, travel mug of coffee in hand. Jude worked from home, spending most of her day in the small office on the second floor. They ate dinner together at 6:30 p.m., usually something simple Jude had cooked. By 10 p.m., they were in bed. It was mind-numbingly boring most of the time, but I couldn't look away. I never could. The monitors cast a blue glow over my makeshift living quarters. A cot in the corner, stacks of notebooks filled with observations. On the wall opposite my workstation hung photos of all my previous subjects. Dozens of families, hundreds of individuals, all meticulously labeled with dates and addresses. The Johnsons' photo, taken surreptitiously on their moving day, held the place of honor in the center. On this particular evening, I watched as Jude prepared dinner. Spaghetti from the looks of it. She hummed as she worked, swaying slightly to the sound of Louis Capaldi's Someone You Loved. On another screen, I saw James's car pull into the driveway. "Honey, I'm home." James's voice came through my speakers as he entered the house. I watched him hang up his coat, kick off his shoes. "In the kitchen," Jude called back. I switched my focus to the kitchen camera, watching their reunion. A kiss, a hug, mundane chatter about their days. I'd seen it all before, with them and with countless others, but something kept me watching, night after night, year after year. I reached for the small box beside my keyboard. Inside lay a collection of souvenirs. A hairbrush with strands of Jude's blonde hair, a used coffee mug with her lipstick prints, a discarded shopping list in Jude's handwriting, small treasures collected during my occasional visits to their home while they were away, or while they slept. As they sat down to eat, I noticed Jude glance nervously at the window. It wasn't the first time I'd seen her do this. Was she starting to suspect something? I leaned closer to the monitor, turning up the volume. "James," Jude said, her voice low. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" I froze. This wasn't part of the script. James laughed, but it sounded forced. "What? You think the neighbors are spying on us or something?" Jude shook her head. "No, it's not that. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes I get this feeling that there are eyes on me, even when I'm alone in the house. It's probably just nerves from the move," James said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "New place, new noises. You'll get used to it." "Maybe," Jude said, but she didn't look convinced. "But haven't you noticed things moving? Little things, not where we left them." My pulse quickened. Had I been careless? Left evidence of my visits? "Like what?" James asked, frowning. "My hairbrush wasn't where I left it yesterday. And last week, I could have sworn I left my coffee mug in the sink, but it was back in the cupboard when I went to make another cup." James chuckled. "Sounds like you're just tired, babe. We've been working hard getting this place set up." Jude nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I made a mental note to be more careful. No more souvenirs for a while. But I couldn't help myself. There was something intoxicating about holding pieces of their lives in my hands, about being in their space when they weren't there or didn't know it, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces. That night, after they had gone to bed, I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I left my station and drove to their house. The neighborhood was quiet, houses dark except for the occasional porch light. I parked several blocks away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. The Johnson house loomed before me, dark except for a nightlight in the upstairs hallway. I knew every inch of this place, knew which floorboards creaked, which windows had faulty locks, which doors hinged silently, and which ones groaned with age. The key I'd copied during construction hung on a chain around my neck, warm against my skin. The back door opened without a sound. I slipped inside, breathing in the scent of their home. Lavender cleaning products, the lingering aroma of that evening's dinner, and underneath it all, the unique smell of the Johnsons themselves. For a long moment, I stood in the darkened kitchen, letting my eyes adjust. On the counter sat a vase of fresh flowers James had brought home the day before. I touched a petal, feeling its silky texture. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I tensed, listening, but it was just the house settling. I could hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of the Johnsons through my earpiece, connected to the bedroom cameras. They were deep in sleep. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching surfaces, straightening pictures, running my fingers over their possessions. In the master bathroom, I opened the medicine cabinet, noting the prescription bottle with Jude's name. Anxiety medication, recent by the date. I smiled. She was feeling my presence more than I realized. In the bedroom, I stood at the foot of their bed, watching them sleep. James on his back, one arm flung over his head. Jude curled on her side, facing away from him. Her blonde hair spilled across the pillow like liquid gold. I could stay here all night, I thought. They'd never know. But that wasn't the plan. Never was. The thrill was in watching from afar, in the separation between observer and subject. To cross that line too often would be to risk everything. Still, I allowed myself one small indulgence. From my pocket, I withdrew a tiny carved wooden bird, no bigger than my thumbnail. I placed it on Jude's nightstand, partially hidden behind her alarm clock. A breadcrumb, a test. Would she notice? Over the next few days, I watched Jude more closely than ever. She was definitely on edge. She'd pause in the middle of tasks, looking around as if she'd heard something. More than once, I saw her examining the walls, the ceilings, searching for something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And yes, she found the bird. I watched her discover it on the second day, her face registering confusion, then fear. She asked James if he'd put it there. He hadn't. The look that passed between them sent a thrill through me that no other observation ever had. That night, they checked the locks 3 times before going to bed. It was thrilling. In all my years of watching, I'd never had subjects come so close in discovering the truth. Part of me wanted them to find a camera, just to see what would happen next. But a larger part of me was worried. If Jude found proof of the cameras, it would all be over. The police would come, the house would be searched, and my entire operation would be exposed. I couldn't let that happen. I began to take precautions. I disabled the cameras in rooms Jude seemed most suspicious of, rerouting their feeds to create blind spots. It was risky. I hated not having total coverage, but it was better than being caught. For a while, it seemed to work. Jude's paranoia appeared to subside. She stopped checking the corners of rooms, stopped jumping at every creak of the house settling. I breathed a sigh of relief. Crisis averted. But I'd underestimated Jude Johnson. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything fell apart. I was half dozing in my chair, the quiet hum of the monitors lulling me into a false sense of security. Movement on one of the screens caught my attention. Jude was in the master bedroom, but something was off. She wasn't puttering around as she usually did at this time of day. Instead, she was methodically examining every inch of the room. She ran her hands along the baseboards, peered into light fixtures, tapped on walls as if listening for hollow spaces. My heart raced. She was looking for the cameras, really looking. I watched in horror as Jude's hand paused on the bedroom's overhead light. It was an ornate fixture, all crystalline shapes and gleaming metal, and nestled in its center, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for, was one of my best concealed cameras. Jude's eyes narrowed. She reached up, her fingers probing the fixture. I held my breath. With a sharp tug, Jude pulled something free from the light. Even on the grainy monitor, I could see the triumph in her eyes as she examined the tiny camera in her palm. "Oh, God," I whispered. On another screen, I saw James's car pulling into the driveway. He was home early. Jude raced downstairs, camera in hand, to meet him. I couldn't hear their conversation. Jude had pulled the camera's microphone when she removed it, but I could see their agitation. James examined the camera, his face pale. Jude gestured wildly, pointing to different areas of the house, probably telling him all the places she'd felt watched. James pulled out his phone. Even without audio, I knew he was calling the police. Panic set in. I had to act fast. With trembling fingers, I initiated the system's kill switch. One by one, the cameras in the Johnson house began to short out. On my monitors, I watched static replace the crisp images of the house's interior. But it wasn't enough. The police would find evidence of the cameras. Even if they weren't transmitting anymore, they'd tear the house apart looking for more. And eventually, they'd trace the signal back to me. I had to get there first. The sun was setting as I pulled up a block away from the Johnson house. I could see police cars in the driveway, lights flashing. Officers milled about on the lawn, too late to clean up then, but not too late for contingencies. I opened my laptop, connecting the secondary system, the one nobody knew about. Not even me, really. Not consciously. The failsafe I'd built years ago during a blackout period I could barely remember. A few keystrokes, and it was done. In the basement of the Johnson house, beneath the floorboards where no one would think to look, the small incendiary device I'd installed, just in case, began to warm. 3 minutes until ignition. Enough time for everyone to get out safely. I wasn't a monster, after all. I just needed to erase the evidence. All of it. I watched from my car as the first wisps of smoke began to curl from the basement windows. Then the shouts, the scrambling of police officers, the front door flying open as James and Jude were hustled outside to safety. The flames rose higher, faster than I'd anticipated. The old house burned like paper. Decades of remodeling, creating perfect channels for the fire to travel. I'd chosen it partly for this reason, though I hadn't admitted it to myself until now. As the sirens of approaching fire trucks filled the air, I slipped away, unnoticed in the chaos. Back at the warehouse, I methodically began to pack. Not everything. I would need to leave most of it behind. Just the essentials. My journals, the souvenirs that meant the most to me, the photos of my subjects, which I carefully placed in a leather-bound album. As I worked, I found myself talking to them, all the families I'd watched over the years, explaining why it had to be this way, why I needed to see them, to know them in ways nobody else ever could. It's not over, I told the photo of the Johnsons, taken on their moving day. They were smiling, excited about their new home. We'll see each other again. You'll never really be free of me. I felt a strange sense of peace as I zipped up my bag. This wasn't the end, just a transition. There would be other houses, other families, other lives to watch. I slung the bag over my shoulder and headed for the door. As I left, I cast one last look at my abandoned command center. In the gray flickering of the monitors, I could almost imagine I saw faces. All the people I'd watched over the years, staring back at me with accusation in their eyes. I shuddered and slammed the door behind me. Across town, standing in the street as their house burned to the ground, Jude and James Johnson huddled together, a blanket draped over their shoulders. Jude clutched the tiny camera in her fist, her knuckles white. "Finally," she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Our little fly has taken the bait." James' mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Humans, so predictable, so delicious when they think they're in control. And now he thinks he's escaped. Jude's grip tightened around the camera until the plastic cracked. As it did, her nails lengthened slightly, turning a shade darker at the tips. A detective approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, we'd like to take your statement now." "Of course, officer," James said, his voice perfectly calibrated to convey shock and distress. "We're just trying to process everything." Jude nodded, letting a single tear fall for effect. But as the detective led them away from the burning house, her nostrils flared slightly. She had caught it, that unique scent, the scent of fear and twisted obsession. The watcher had been here, watching them burn, and now she had his scent. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" the detective asked. "Yes," James said. "My sister lives just outside of town. We'll be fine." 3 hours later, in a motel room 50 miles away, I set up a laptop on a rickety desk. The screen flickered to life, showing a new feed. From the tiny camera hidden in the brooch, the Red Cross volunteer had given Jude Johnson along with the blanket. I smiled, settling in to watch. The Johnsons were special, after all. I couldn't let them go just yet. The feed showed an unfamiliar room, sparse, utilitarian. Not a sister's home as they'd told the detective. Jude sat on the edge of a bed, staring directly into the camera, at me. "Hello, Watcher," she said, her voice coming through the tinny speakers. "You really shouldn't have picked our house." My blood froze. How could she know? James appeared in the frame, placing a hand on Jude's shoulder. "Of all the houses in all the towns, you had to walk into ours," he said with a mirthless laugh. "Bad luck for you." My hands trembled on the keyboard. This wasn't possible. "You know what's funny?" Jude continued, her face changing as she spoke, her jaw elongated slightly, teeth becoming visible as her lips pulled back in what couldn't quite be called a smile. "We've been trying to keep a low profile, blend in, feed quietly." James's hand on her shoulder changed too, fingers lengthening, nails darkening to an inky black. "But then you came along with your cameras and your little games, and you burned our home." "We're a bit territorial," Jude added. "And now we're hungry and homeless. That makes us irritable." I scrambled back from the laptop, knocking the chair over. I needed to run, to get away. But even as I turned toward the door, I heard it, a soft scratching from the other side. "The thing about burning our nest," Jude's voice continued from the laptop, "is that you forced us to hunt, and we're very, very good at hunting." The scratching grew louder, more insistent. "Your scent was all over our house," James said. "The wooden bird, the hairbrush you stole, all those little souvenirs, they work both ways." The door to my hotel room splintered open. In the doorway stood the Johnsons, their forms only vaguely human now, their skin stretched tight over elongated limbs, mouths filled with jagged teeth. "You wanted to watch us?" Jude hissed, saliva dripping between needle-like teeth. "How intimate, how personal."
"We usually prefer to keep to ourselves,"
James added, his voice distorted by his transformed vocal cords.
"But you just had to push, had to burn our home."
As they lunged forward, I had one final, horrifying realization. All these years, I thought I was the predator, the watcher, but I'd just been lucky enough to choose normal human prey. Until the Johnsons. No one ever really escapes being watched, but sometimes the watched are watching. They are patient, and sometimes they are hungry. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carmen's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, Fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carmen's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.